he tells a story in here about a couple young colleagues that he had in a meeting, and they just sat there in the meeting. They're very junior people, and they just sat there, didn't say anything the whole meeting. The meeting ends, meeting goes well, the client's happy, and he pulls these two juniors aside, and he goes, "What were you doing in that meeting? Did you know you were completely irrelevant in that meeting? You sat there, you didn't even need to be there. There was no reason for you to be there." And he goes on to say, that was a hard thing for them to hear, but they needed to hear it.
Let's blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad. It is time for the world premiere installment of Let's Blow This Up. I'm your host, Jason Cercone, and whether you're listening to this podcast on your favorite streaming app or you're watching it on YouTube, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for being here as we officially get Let's Blow This Up off the ground. This is Season 1, Episode 1, and I am pleased to be joined by my friend Steve Radick, who is the Executive Vice President and Managing Director at BCW Global. Steve brings a wealth of PR knowledge and business acumen. When you hear this dude's resume, you're going to know why he is kicking this series off. Season 1 is all about qualities that go into building an impactful brand, and Steve brought the goods to this podcast. You're going to hear a lot about how to not be irrelevant in everything you do, why so many brands are not taking risks these days, and why you do not want to fall into that category. So I'm going to end this intro right now so you can get to why you showed up here today, and that is to hear my epic conversation with Steve Radick right here on the world premiere installment of Let's Blow This Up. Let's get to it. So I got to ask, because we obviously have some commonalities on the TV side. How sucked in do you get to House whenever you put it on?
So House is one of those shows. I never knew much about the show House until it was like 1 year, like 10 years ago. And it was snowy, and we had traveled back from DC, I think it was at the time, and we were staying at my father-in-law's place. Mm-hmm. It was snowy. We had nothing to do. It was over Christmas break or something, Thanksgiving. It was some break where we had a few days, and we watched one episode because it was on. It was like on one, USA or something, and stumbled onto it. And I think we watched 10 episodes that day.
Yeah, that's what happens.
We just got sucked into it, and then we binged the entire 8 seasons or however many long it was. It's just such a good show. It is absolutely one of my favorite shows, one of my favorite characters of all time. Hugh Laurie is just fantastic in it.
Yeah, it's pure brilliance from start to finish. I remember I for whatever reason, when that show first came out on Fox, it grabbed me, and I saw the previews. I'm like, okay, I've got to check this one out. This looks real good.
Yeah.
And it did. It sucked me in from the first episode. So that was one of the last cable series that I've ever watched from start to finish. Anything else that I've gotten into, I've caught up with later on, or the show was already done. The big one is another one that you had mentioned, the West Wing. That was a pandemic one that we watched during the pandemic. I don't know why I never got into it when it was on, but my dad was a huge fan, and he was always telling me, you've got to watch the West Wing. And he had the DVDs, and I started watching it, and I love the show now, and I've had to watch it a few times. And the first time you watch it through, you can't not pay attention.
Right.
Because you're lost. You missed 1 minute. You're wondering what the hell happened.
It's Sorkin's writing is so quick, and it's so witty that there are so many little things that are funny that lead to other things that happen later on, sometimes seasons later. That if you, like you said, if you look away for a few minutes, you're going to miss, and then you're going to be lost.
That's good TV in my opinion. But again, the more you watch it, the more you get invested in that storyline, those characters, and I'll tell you, it's 2024 now. That show was on in the early 2000s, late 90s. It's amazing how many parallels you can still draw to today's political world and just our world as a whole with issues they were dealing with on that show 20 some years ago.
I mean, what did they say? History repeats itself. That's a prime example.
Indeed. My friend, we could sit here and talk about television all day. I have no qualms about that, but listeners might want to know a little bit more about you and the just incredibly huge, amazing resume that you are bringing to Let's Blow This Up today. So let's dive in. So Steve Radick, we've got you here for a good amount of time. We're going to really dive deep on some great things. We really want to talk about establishing brands and how you've played a role in doing that over the years. That's a big part of the theme of season 1 here of Let's Blow This Up. Mm-hmm. Before we dive into all of that and really get into the nuts and bolts of this today, give us some background on Steve.
Sure.
Tell us who you are, where you've been. I know you've done a lot in the professional space, so share it with our audience. Let them know what is happening.
So thanks for having me here. I think my affiliation with brands comes, or my history with brands is a very unique one, I think, because I started out in the professional services space. I started out as a consultant, and I started as a consultant when I didn't know what the hell a consultant was. I was traditional PR guy coming out of school, and I just wanted a job in public relations. And one of the alumni from my fraternity at my college, Bethany College, about an hour west of Pittsburgh, reached out and said he was looking for people to be a communications consultant. And I didn't know what a consultant was. That's not a job I was searching for when I was doing my job search. And I talked to him a little bit about it, and he said, you basically tell people what to do and they pay you for it. I'm like, I could definitely do that. I have a long history of doing that. And someone's going to pay me for it and not yell at me for it. This is fantastic. And I thought I was going to do that for, a couple years, get some experience and get a real PR job. And I ended up doing it for 9 years. And I was down at this consulting firm called Booz Allen down in DC. And I was there for so long because I reinvented myself every few years. I got a new job every few years. I basically got all the benefits of a new job without having to change employers and go through the new hire orientation. And so it was a really, really good learning experience, a really solid foundation for the rest of my career. The one thing that they told me, in our orientation, the first week that I'll never forget was, you are getting paid to tell your clients that they're dumb and then have them thank you for it. And that was a really powerful statement for me because it taught me that, they're our clients, whether you're on the agency side or in professional services, whether you're a consultant, whatever role you have, if you have a customer, if you have a client, your job isn't to make them happy. Your job is to tell them the truth. Your job is to be honest with them. You are the consigliere. You are the person they need to rely on when they don't know what to do. And your job isn't just to be a customer service representative and make them happy. It is to tell them the truth. And after doing that for a while at Booz Allen and working there, I got kind of bored with the consultant life and working in the government and being the person to just elevate best practices for them. And there was a lot of that in the government and creativity. Yes, you want creativity, but for the most part, they were looking for what worked, what worked elsewhere, and how do we apply it to what we're doing now. It was very low risk. And I wanted to be a little bit more risky. I wanted more of that creativity. And so I went to Chicago and I worked at an ad agency there, got to work on some really big brands. That was my first exposure to like traditional brand building, working with big brands, Porsche and Corona and Heinz and Cetaphil and amusement Maui Gym sunglasses, Cedar Fair amusement parks. Got a chance to work on some really big, fun brands and learn really what went into a brand. And then I did that for a while, and it had twin girls. I had a 3-year-old girl at the time, and we moved back to Pittsburgh back in 2014 to get closer to our families. And we moved back then, and I took over a job at Brunner here in Pittsburgh, where I led their PR department I did that for about 4 years. and then joined BCW here in 2018, and I've been at BCW, soon to become Burson, later this year, and I've been there about a little over 5 years now.
Like I said, you've had a very impressive run and you've done a lot of great things. I got to ask, as you made that transition from working for the government and then going into the brand space and working with all these very world renowned brands, what was that like? How were you able to do that seamlessly? Because I would think there's a lot of that first initial world that you were in where you were telling people what they need to know, which I agree with 100%. And I do want to dive into that a little bit more because I feel when you get things sugar coated for you, you're not going to learn anything. You're never going to grow, and you're ultimately never going to reach the goals that you have set for yourself. That's personally, professionally, you name it. But how did you make that transition and do it in such a powerful, positive way?
Well, I appreciate the word seamlessly, because that's a total lie. There was a lot of seams, Best way I could tell you is it was terrifying. It
Yeah.
was. I didn't know if I could do it. I distinctly remember about 2 months in, I was in a meeting. It was a creative meeting. It was a brainstorm. All these creatives were in there. They were all 10 minutes late to the meeting. They're walking in wearing leather jackets and skinny jeans, and I'm in, my button down, still feeling like, I was at my government consultant days. And the meeting happens and it goes fine. I'm contributing some things. I'm elevating best practices. I'm identifying things that worked before. I'm kind of doing what I was doing when I was at the government. And I'll never forget our ECD, the executive creative director at the time, pulled me aside after the meeting and he goes, "Steve, like, you're really smart. We love having you on the team. You're great, but like, you got to start bringing some new shit to the table. Like, everything you say is like what another brand did. It's something that another organization did. That's easy. We can find that. Like, they're paying us to come up with new shit, new
Mhm.
things that people haven't done before. So I don't know what you got to do. Like, I appreciate all of that, but like, work on that creativity muscle. He's like, he literally goes, I don't know if you need to go smoke a bowl in the park and then come back, and know what you and have some new ideas, but like, push yourself to do new ideas. And I'll never forget, I went home that day and I was like, I don't know if I can cut it here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. Like, did I make a horrible mistake leaving
Yeah.
this job in DC where I was successful? Everyone liked what I was doing. I was on the growth path, all of that. Like, did I make a horrible mistake? I don't know if I can do this. And I really challenge myself to be more creative, to try to come up with new wacky ideas. And that's where I started kind of just embracing that creativity gene, or creativity muscle that I had. And it takes a lot of work to get yourself into that headspace, where you're throwing crazy ideas at the wall and building on them, and not being afraid of people being like, "What the hell are you talking about, Radick?"
Right.
And once I embraced that, then everything started kind of moving in a much better direction.
I think you said something perfectly right there that I want to address. The fact that you just let the inhibitions go
Yeah.
and you weren't afraid of what people said. I think that's where the most creative ideas come from. And when you have that fear of someone shooting down an idea, or it's in your mind and it's saying, the little dude on your shoulder saying, no one's going to like this. This is terrible. This sucks. Bury it, burn it. You potentially cost yourself huge opportunities. Throw some things out there, throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. As an Italian, I hate that term because if that's how you test if your spaghetti's done, you're doing it all wrong.
Right.
But using it figuratively, if you have an idea that you feel could change the world, even on a small, minute scale, throw it out there. If people say no, the worst that you're going to get is a no, and you move on and you try something new.
One of the challenges to brand building, and one of the challenges that I experienced in trying to work that creativity muscle, was getting over that fear of someone's going to judge me. Someone's not going to like that idea. And if you look at any creative execution that a brand has done over the last 100 years, nothing is 100% liked. Everyone has an opinion, especially when you get into marketing. And those brands follow that same rule, of just throwing it out there and just seeing
Yeah.
and not being afraid. And too many brands now, too many organizations now are too afraid to just put things out there and just stand behind it and say, yeah, this was great for this population that we were marketing to or that we were talking to. It's not great for the other population. That's fine. And we're okay with that. We're not trying to be everything to everybody. And that's what individuals do. That's what I was doing. I was trying to come up with something that everyone in the room would be like, oh, yeah, good job, Steve. That's great. And what I was getting was that very reaction. I was getting, okay, yeah, that's fine. None of my ideas went through. It's like, if you've ever heard like people from like improv or like the SNL writers room talk about, the successful writers or the unsuccessful writers always talk about how they put stuff forward that they really liked, and it never got chosen for the show. It would never end up in the show. And you see them once in a while in like the ensemble, but they're never the star. They never have the sketches there. And the people that actually get the sketches are the people throwing stuff out there. And you hear the stories about like the god awful sketches Will Ferrell would throw out, but he would hit on obviously a ton of them too. But it's that issue of quantity at that point, like just putting those ideas out there and you start seeing people build on them. And that's what I didn't get. That's what I did as a consultant. You don't really have that luxury as a consultant. Getting paid to be a consultant, you're supposed to know. You're not supposed to just have random ideas and throwing them out there. You're supposed to know. Like you're the one that they come back to and say, is this a good idea? And you say yes or no. Like that's where I was. And when I went into the creative space, that's not what they wanted. They just wanted people to throw things out there and like build on them and see how we can kind of gel around an idea. And so a lot of times I learned, and I still do this to this day. I go and I say, now, this isn't the idea, but maybe this leads to the idea. And maybe one of you in this room can kind of build off of this. So I'm just going to throw it out there. And once you make it okay as a leader to do that, then you start allowing other people in the room who may not be as comfortable, who may be like me, coming from a background where they're like, I don't know what the hell to say here. Then you make it okay for them to throw something out as well and let people build on it.
You have that creative space, like you said, you're opening up the minds of everybody to start to feel that way. And that's where the true creativity can come from, because when people start to realize that there is a filter in place, that everybody is going to serve as one another's filter, it does allow you to bring more creative ideas to the table and not hold anything back, because if we don't use it, who gives a shit? We'll move on to something else. And who knows, this is an idea that I may say today that has no relevance to what we're working on today, but 6 months down the road, we start a new project. And that idea that you had 6 months ago was perfect. Thanks, Jason. Now we have a jumping off point. We have a head start on all of this creativity that we need to put into this new project. So I think that's strong as hell. But I have to ask, because you said it, with the brands today having fear of putting these ideas out there, I think a lot of it goes back to what we were saying before, where a lot of people are looking for this validation and this sugar-coated answer that you're doing okay, you're on the right track, things are good, but there's no real tough love in the room anymore. Why have we moved away from that so much from a business perspective? And I think society as a whole, and I don't think neither of us are equipped to tackle that today. But overall, from a business perspective, the fact that brands have this tendency of not wanting to put things out there, as you said, but also not wanting to hear the truth that maybe what they're doing is not going to work and they need to pivot. Where did this fear come from, and what can we do to get beyond it?
Social media. I think that you
short
saw,
answer, yes.
It's this fear that one person could torpedo a brand. It's this fear that one person with an army of followers can destroy everything. And so they brands have taken a spot of or a position of fear when they roll out new marketing campaigns. When they roll out new commercials or new social content, they start looking at it like, well, those 5 people commented on my Facebook. Oh my God, like we pause everything. What do we do? And the number of times I've been called into a room where they're like, we got some concerning comments on our latest video. And, my immediate response is usually good. Like, do you have other comments as well? Well, yeah, 90% of the comments are great. but we got 10% that are really having some problems. And okay, so what's the problem? Like, these are just random people. Are these people you care about? No, I mean, we didn't really look. We just saw, that we got the sentiment analysis from, whatever tool we were using. And it takes a little bit of a backbone to step back and say, we like what we're doing. We did the research beforehand. We talked to the focus groups. We did the interviews with our stakeholders. Our stakeholders are really liking it. And if a few other people have said they don't like it, that's fine. Like, that's not something we have to overreact to. And for a while with social, that's what everyone did. Everyone overreacted to a few Facebook comments, a few Instagram comments, out of fear that some influencer with 10 million followers was going to get a hold of it and try and torpedo everything, and it made them operate out of a place of fear. And there are times when that has happened. Like, we've seen brands get canceled, or we've seen people get canceled because of that. I'm not referring to those instances. I'm referring to the times when every marketing campaign, everything is explored under that microscope, and it paralyzes brands to the point where they don't do anything of substance, because they try to be as milquetoast as possible to everyone, and they get that reaction, and they might get some likes, but for the most part, everyone scrolls past.
Yeah, there's that fine line that you need to walk, and there are certain times that you don't want to go too far beyond that line. But at the same time, I think it's important to realize that a little bit of controversy can stir up the engagement that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, once that engagement starts to get stirred up, the right people are going to come to the battle lines and defend what you're doing. And those are the people that you want to appeal to. You're never going to be for everyone. That's just impossible. It's an unrealistic expectation to think that you can go out there and make the whole world happy. No one is ever going to be able to accomplish that. And as technology continues to evolve and people spend more time on social media, that belief needs to be at the forefront even more, because you're going to waste a lot of time and go into that mode of not wanting to take risks or try new things and just be this bland, non-attention grabbing entity that no one gives a damn about.
I'll never forget. It was 2000, I think the 2018 Super Bowl. I was working on a Super Bowl commercial for 84 Lumber, and 84 Lumber, if you're familiar with it, it's a locally owned, a privately owned lumber company, but it's national. They make billions of dollars every year. It's become this huge thing, and it's owned by Maggie Hardy, who's been a CEO there for a while. Her father founded the company, and she was a hard client. But she's a hard client because she demands excellence, and she's not afraid of any of that. And so when you have to get over that mindset of what you were talking about, of like trying to be everything to everyone. She doesn't try to be everything to everyone. She just tries to be herself. And so when I was working with her, she was very demanding, but she was also knew exactly what she wanted, and she would embrace that creativity. She embraced the push to really tell her story, and she didn't care. As the owner of a private company, she didn't have to answer to a board. She didn't have to answer to shareholders. She could just do what she wanted. And once I got my mindset over, trying to be everything to everyone, trying to play the safe route, and instead embrace that attitude of that she had, we were able to create a really, really strong Super Bowl commercial that it really pissed off, half the country. But that was half she didn't care about. She really wanted to drive that controversy. She really wanted to use that to get people talking about an issue that she really cared about. And she succeeded in that. And we succeeded in that. We had a great time working on that. It was one of the busiest times in my career. But I told my team at the time, I was like, you're going to work some crazy hours over the next couple months, but when you're 50, you're still going to put this on your resume that you worked on this. And that's a pretty cool thing to work on. So it was a hard 2 months that we worked on, but I can't thank her enough for that opportunity.
Let me piggyback on that a little bit, because it sounds like you said 2 months doing this campaign. I'm assuming this all led to a 30-second Super Bowl commercial.
No, it was a 90-second Super Bowl commercial.
Oh, okay. All right. So, the question I wanted to ask was, typically, as you were building these Super Bowl campaigns, What type of work are you putting into it? Because we know Super Bowl is the stage, and that stage has changed a bit, and that's something I want to ask you about too. But before we get there, let me ask this first. Let me say, sounds like what you've done with what you did with 84 Lumber really took things up to another level, exactly what your client was looking for. What was the work like? Like, what did you have to do to make that all come together?
So the brief was really around recruitment and how do we drive more people, more talented people to choose a career at 84 Lumber, but bigger than that because that's pretty self-serving, right? Like everyone's done you could do a recruitment campaign and drive leads and come work here and do all of that, and that's kind of what they did for years in the past, and they weren't getting the quantity or the quality of people that they wanted. And so the brief was really around, drive more people and drive better people to choose a career in the trades, because that is less self-serving. That is a more noble cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in the discussion, keep in mind, this discussion first happened in like November of 2017. So, when she said she wanted to do a Super Bowl commercial, that's every ad agency's dream is to do a Super Bowl commercial.
Sure.
And we assumed she was talking about for 2019, because who decides to do a Super Bowl commercial at the end of November when you have 2 months before? But no, she wanted to do it then. And not only then, she wanted to do, well, at the time it was an 84-second, commercial, but she wanted to do a long Super Bowl commercial.
Was that by coincidence? 84 seconds, 84 Lumber?
Oh, everything. I mean,
okay.
Think about where the town's located. South of Pittsburgh in Washington County. It's called 84.
84, right. Okay. Makes sense.
So she wanted to do 84 seconds, 84 Lumber. And it was all about recruitment. And so the discussion, again, back to our original discussion around brand building, we couldn't just do a Super Bowl commercial. When you play on that stage, you are under the biggest microscope the world has in marketing and advertising. And so it had to be true too. It couldn't just be, oh, look at all this shiny stuff that we've got. We're offering, these bonuses, we're offering these salaries. It had to be a little bit more substantive. So my role on this, while the creative team is off, concepting the actual spot and working through the actual TV spot and video production, all of that good stuff, I'm working through how do we make sure that this is all true and that we put our money where our mouth is. So I start getting to work on what are the organizations that we can partner with? What are the donations that we have to make? What are the stories that we already do that we have to pull out and tell in the months leading up to the Super Bowl and then the months after the Super Bowl, to make sure that whatever we're doing in the Super Bowl is, one, authentic to who 84 Lumber was, but two, it is showing action where our words were in the Super Bowl, that there's actions behind it. So there was a lot of messaging and organization and coalition building around the sentiment that we were expressing in terms of recruiting people to the trades.
In your past efforts before 84 Lumber, when you were in Chicago, were you working on Super Bowl ads then as well, or was this your first foray into that field?
No, my first Super Bowl ad was with Heinz. I believe, I forget the year. I believe it was like 2000. I want to say 2016, 2015, something around there. Heinz had come back to the Super Bowl. They were not a Super Bowl advertiser for like 30 years. And they came back, and my agency, Kramer Krasselt at the time, did their Super Bowl commercial. And I was working on more on the social side then, but the social and PR side of things on how to go about, taking advantage of that big game spot. And so the 84 Lumber spot was actually my second foray into Super Bowl commercials and all the things that go around that.
So where we are now in 2024, social media has played a big role in the eventual Super Bowl ad itself. Do you feel that's helped or hurt that grand stage?
There's always I mean, if I could tell you the number of hours I spent in meetings with our creative team, leading up to both spots, really, but more so on the 84 Lumber spot, about what do we leak early? Do we leak the whole thing? Do we tease it? What do we do? And I think what it's done is, done right, I think it can build anticipation.
Yeah.
I think what it does is it gets you on the radar, and you don't have the shock of like, we're all watching the Super Bowl, right? Like, and you got some chips in your hand, you got a wing in your hand, you got a beer in your hand, you got all this stuff going on around you. And how many times do you look at, you see a spot and you go, wait, what was that for? What the hell just happened? I don't even know who that was. That was cool, but I don't know who it was, or I don't know what it was for. What social does in the lead up to it is it allows you to build anticipation for it, so that when that spot hits, that you know to look for it. You know what's coming. You have some sense of, I want to watch this because I am aware of what is about to come, or I am aware that Pete Davidson is in it, and if I see him, I know what it's for. And so you want to drive that use social to drive that interest and the media coverage in an ideal world, so that when the Super Bowl spot hits, people are already knowing what it's for and are talking about it already.
A big one that I'm thinking of, and it's funny, as we sit and talk today, we're 6 days from Super Bowl 58 with the Chiefs and 49ers. The one that I've seen, there's two brands that I've seen really doing a lot to build up to what is going to be their spot. And FanDuel did this last year with Rob Gronkowski, building up to him kicking this field goal. Now, whether you think that's great or not, whatever, it's proof that you can utilize the social media aspect and build up to almost like it's a little side commercial / series that's going to take place at the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Again, giving you reason to pay attention because maybe you want to see if he makes that kick this year. And the other brand is MGM with Vince Vaughn and Tom Brady. They've been doing spots on social media. I've seen it on Facebook a number of times. I have to imagine, being that those spots are funny, it's going to be even better when you get to the actual Super Bowl, because that's where they're really going to blow it up. So yeah, there's a lot to it. I feel it can help, but overall, my opinion, and maybe it's just me getting older and a little bit more jaded, I don't feel like the quality of the commercials is as good. Now, production quality, 100% better than ever. But just the overall stories that they're telling, I don't feel as engaged as I used to. And that's just my personal feeling. I know others probably feel different.
Creating engaging, explosive content that positions your brand as an authority and go-to resource in your industry doesn't need to be complicated, stressful, or time-consuming. All you need is a strategy that sets you up for success and a partner to keep you on the right track. This is my mission at Bombtrack Media. I'll show you the most efficient way to produce brand-elevating content that can be utilized throughout your digital footprint, all done with your goals and busy schedule in mind. You're not a full-time podcaster. Why commit to a full-time podcaster's schedule? It's time for you to blow this up and rethink how you grow your brand. Visit bombtrackmedia.com today to learn more.
Well, I think two things on that. So on your first point about the social and the lead up and how they're doing spots, leading up to whatever spot or whatever activation they do during the Super Bowl, I think is a key point that a lot of people don't think of outside of this industry, is that a Super Bowl commercial, whether it's 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 84 seconds, 90 seconds, whatever it ends up being, that's just one part of the media buy that you're executing with that advertiser or with that network. There are other things that are involved in that. Sometimes there are packages of, you have to buy a certain amount of airtime on that channel beyond the Super Bowl, because they're trying to fill inventory, not just during that 4-hour spot of the game, but in the lead up to it and then afterwards. So they want you advertising during, like for Fox, it was like they wanted our spots to run during their morning shows in the weeks before and after the game as well. And so you can look at that and say, oh, the Super Bowl commercial was so expensive. I don't know what it is this year, $8 million or whatever.
Probably pushing it. I imagine it was over 7 last year, so I imagine it's over 8.
Yeah, if inflation hits my eggs, I'm assuming it hits Super Bowl commercials as well. But that's not all you're getting. It's not like it's $8 million for 30 seconds. It's $8 million for the media buy that you get everything else. And so the brands that know how to take advantage of that aspect and can negotiate that with the networks and say, listen, we want the spot, but we also want some of the lead up to it and be able to run commercials. And you have to spend money on the production and create a whole other spot for that, which they had to use Gronk to do that. But I want them for social too. I want you to share some of the stuff in your social media. I want to leverage some of your on-air talent to highlight, what we're doing. I want to get, a wraparound banner on your morning show leading up to that. When we did 84 Lumber, we sponsored the green room for the Super Bowl pregame show. And so we had all of the logos and everything in the green room for when celebrities come in before they do the green room. So there's a lot that goes into these Super Bowl sponsorships beyond just the one TV commercial. And the brands that know how to embrace that and understand how they all play off one another, those are the ones that drive the most talk value versus the ones that just look at it as, well, I got my 30-second spot and that's going to drive everything for me.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know even myself, I've never thought about that full picture of what's involved. And you're absolutely right. I didn't think about beyond the Super Bowl. A lot of times we just get locked into that day, which I somehow it's still not a holiday where you can get Monday off because who's not partaking in the Super Bowl? But that's
unless the Steelers make it. If the Steelers make it, I'm willing to bet that we would get Monday off here in Pittsburgh.
Well, no, yes and no. I remember 2005. I had to go to work the next day because me and my manager had worked out that he was thinking about going, and he said he had asked for it months off, and I was the assistant manager, and I really didn't have a leg to stand on. So I went with it, but I will say it was a fun day to be at work. Everybody was in a great mood that day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember. Well, I took the day off. No, did I take the day off? I'm trying to think. I know I was at the office, the agency over at Bruner until about 3 a.m. the day of the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And we actually had some some of our agency flew out to New York, like later that night, had to jump on a plane, like right after the Super Bowl ended and get to New York for some interviews that they were doing. But it was crazy. And I think I came in that afternoon actually, because I think that we had some wrap up PR stuff. So I did come in the next day, but I do remember, I think it was, there's some cities that have offered a day off the next day that I think it would be smart. Maybe the morning off, the following morning would be a good idea for the country, just to have a little bit of mental health and nurse that hangover a little bit.
A little bit. I do remember how it went now because my manager it was in Detroit, so we were close, and he thought he might be going to the game. So he wanted to make sure he was off and covered, and I said, okay, fine, but I get the parade day off. And he said, that's fine. So I got to go to the parade, and that was a blast.
Nice.
Before we move on, since we're so close, and this will now be history as this episode is officially live for people to listen to, what beer will you have in hand for the Super Bowl, and who's winning?
So what beer will I have in hand? I will probably have a what is it? General Braddock's Brew Gentleman.
Nice.
Which is one of my favorites, or a Dancing Gnome Lustra. I have to say, I usually have one of those two in my refrigerator at all times. So I'll probably be drinking one of those. And then who do I have winning? I have the Chiefs winning. I think I want the 49ers to win, but it's like 51-49. Because on the one hand, I'm a little tired of the Chiefs and Mahomes. On the other hand, I don't want the 49ers to win another, and I think that would be their sixth.
Yeah.
And then to tie us. But I like how the 49ers have built their team a little bit more, because I think it's more similar to what the Steelers are trying to do. And if the 49ers can win, maybe, we have a little bit more hope with the Steelers, because I think Kenny or whoever our quarterback is next year is going to it resembles more of the Brock Purdy model than the Patrick Mahomes model.
That's asking a lot.
Yeah.
I have my late uncle is a huge Chiefs fan, so I always pull for the Chiefs. So we'll see what happens. I'm not tired of them. A lot of people have said it. I have not been tired of this Taylor Swift stuff. I haven't been tired of the Chiefs at all. I don't know what it is. Maybe it is that link through the family and the blood, but at the same time, I like watching them because they find a way to win. And I think there's a lot of parallels that you can draw from that when you're trying to develop yourself and your brand in a professional way and make these strides forward. You got to find a way. And they always do it, because you look at them throughout the regular season. Their receivers aren't catching balls. They're letting Mahomes down. I look at what they do on the field when it matters, when they get to the playoffs. No one else is doing that right now.
Right.
That's why I think they're going to win this weekend.
Yeah, I mean,
I heard it here second.
I do think the Chiefs will end up pulling it out, just because Mahomes has that ability to do that. I think part of it is like I'm a girl dad. I love everything Taylor Swift has done in bringing new audiences, and my girls are way more interested in their games now. No problem with that. I think it goes back to the Patriots. The reason I don't necessarily want the Chiefs to win, because I don't want the Steelers to get caught again behind another dynamic Hall of Fame quarterback and their dynasty. We should have won 2 or 3 more Super Bowls if it wasn't for Brady. And I just fear that, Mahomes is doing the same thing to the rest of the AFC.
There is a solution on our end. We could win the freaking Super Bowl again.
We could. That would be nice.
That
would be nice.
Just asking for a lot right now, and that's a subject that would take too long to break down. Steve, let me ask you this. Let's bring it back to the business side of things. What's the worst advice that you've ever received?
So I think the worst advice that I ever received, and I'm not going to say it's the worst for everyone, but for me it was. I had a senior person tell me way back when I was at Booz Allen, when I was in the consulting game, and they told me that I had to act like the role that I want to get in the future. Look at that person that you want, the title that you want, the position that you want, and act like that person, and choose to kind of model yourself in meetings, model your work after him or her. And, it's pretty traditional advice, be like, that person, dress like that person, dress for the role that you want, all of that good stuff. And at the time, this was 2006 or so. And I was just starting to look into social media at the time. And it was brand new. No one knew what the hell they were doing. It was like, what are the Googles and what are the Twitters in the DC area and the federal government? No one knew what they were doing. This wasn't stuff people used for work. We were still writing had a grilled cheese for lunch.
Right.
And so that advice really kind of set me back a little bit, because I was trying to, again, this was where I think what I was telling you about before, the creative muscles and understanding the difference in being creative and original versus being, best practices and smart and sophisticated. I had to learn how to make my own mark and carve a new path. And I think that's when I kind of really threw that advice out the window. And I started, this was early 2000s in government consulting in the federal government. I stopped wearing a tie to work every day. I wore colored shirts that weren't blue or white. This was pushing boundaries back then. And I had people literally pull me aside and say, this is going to hold you back. You can't be in the room with, the undersecretaries of defense and the big policymakers wearing a bright orange shirt and no jacket. What are you doing? It was called a career limiting move, if you've heard that term before. And I was like, I don't want to be like you. I don't want that role. I'm doing something new. I'm talking about blogs and wikis to super high level people in the government. I can't do that. I can't teach them something new. I can't push the boundaries and push the envelope if I look exactly like everyone else. I have to look and sound differently. And that's when my career really started to kind of take off from there, was because I started to do something that was just me. And once I did that and found my thing was when everything started to click.
That's something that, again, we go back to what we were saying before about the fear of putting yourself out there and putting ideas out there. I think a lot of people have that idea in their mind that putting themselves out there in some way, shape, or form that goes against the grain is going to lead to nothing but turmoil, nothing but rejection, nothing but people saying you're doing it wrong. And therefore, a lot of people won't take action. I'm big in the podcasting space, and I think a lot about when I talk to people, and I've had many consultations and people that I've either worked with or just had those conversations in passing. No one wants to hear what I have to say. No one cares about my opinion and my slant. Wrong. If you have something to say it. If people listen, they listen. If they don't, they don't. But at least instead of sitting on that idea or that thought or that perspective, it holds so many people back from taking action that we live in a world where And it's always been this way, but I think it's elevated even more that if you don't take any action at all, you're just going to get completely lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, that's a great point about stepping up and giving that advice, or giving your perspective, even if you don't think anyone cares. Jeremy Baca is one of our ECDs here at BCW, and he gives this advice, and he tells this story in this book that he wrote. It's called The Book We Wish We Had, by Jeremy Baca, and he tells this story in here about a couple young colleagues that he had in a meeting, and they just sat there in the meeting. They're very junior people, and they just sat there, didn't say anything the whole meeting. The meeting ends, meeting goes well, the client's happy, and he pulls these two juniors aside, and he goes, "What were you doing in that meeting? Did you know you were completely irrelevant in that meeting? You sat there, you didn't even need to be there. There was no reason for you to be there." And he goes on to say, that was a hard thing for them to hear, but they needed to hear it. And then years later, he said one of them came back and called him up years later. He was now an executive at another ad agency. And he said, I wasn't irrelevant today. And he said, he was in a meeting. He didn't know, he wasn't the expert or whatever, but he gave his thoughts, and the client ultimately, built on his idea, and they went with his idea. But he was like, the lesson is, don't be irrelevant. If you're there and you don't say anything, you're irrelevant. Yeah. Do not be irrelevant.
That's something I feel could be advice that you're going to tattoo into your brain for the rest of your life. You hear something like that. We're all going to be at a point where there is that feeling of irrelevance. We feel like we're not bringing enough to the table. We aren't doing enough. Sometimes we can be self-aware enough to realize it ourselves. Sometimes it takes a little tough love from others. But if we don't learn from that, it's just like anything else. You have to take that lesson and say, okay, everything I do going forward, I'm not going to be irrelevant.
Right.
You can even ask yourself that question. Is this irrelevant? Is this making me irrelevant? If it is, take action to do the opposite. There's a lot you can learn from that. That is huge advice.
And there's a lot that went on in my career back when we were doing social, and that started kind of building. And when you got to 2010, 2011, and you start talking to people about social, and they're like, I'm not doing that. Like in comms, or like that's social by, that our social team does that. I don't mess with that. I told them that back then. I was like, you're risking becoming irrelevant, because this is not going away. This is just being integrated in everything that we do. You don't have to be an expert at it, but you have to be understanding of it and understand how it works. And that's kind of where we're going with AI now, is if you don't continue to embrace all of these new technologies, these new ways of working, you risk becoming irrelevant. And those tend to be the people that are 48 years old, 50 years old, that get laid off. And they look around, they're like, oh my God, what happened? And it's like, well, did you spend the last 10 years slowly becoming irrelevant? And that's what, one of my things is, I never want to become that. I never want to get to a point where, I rest on my laurels and slowly become irrelevant.
It's boring, right? Like there's no action. It's just, life becomes boring. I have a friend that always talks about this in regards to growth think of a room, and it's all white. Everything, furniture, carpeting, walls, fixtures. How boring is that room? Like people will say often, if they have something like that in their house, you can't go in that room. It's just for show. Well, what the hell is that good for? So living life in that capacity, no, thank you. That sucks.
My aunt, when I was growing up, used to have a room with the plastic on the couch, and and the vacuum lines like you have in like, well, don't go in there. That's grandma's room, or that's Aunt Susie's room, or whatever. It was always about keeping the aesthetic alive rather than just the fun and livelihood of things.
Steve, we're getting ready to wind things down here. So let me ask, what's one big piece of advice you can give the Bomb Squad to help them build their brands, or even if they're looking to make some changes and some pivots in their life and put fear on the back burner, start putting ideas forward? What's some advice you would give them to make that happen in their world today?
I think the biggest thing that I would say is to be unapologetically you, and to not let yourself get too comfortable. I think that those two things, being afraid to be who you are because you're trying to be someone else, because you're trying to get another position, or you're trying to get a raise, or you're trying to be like your mentor or whatever, or becoming too comfortable in the role that you're in, and getting fat and happy, and just not pushing yourself. If you can do those two things, be unapologetically you, and embrace uncomfortableness, and run to opportunities that make you uncomfortable, that are new to you, that you're learning from. I think those two bits of advice are probably the two best things that I can tell, your listeners, and that I tell my mentees as well. It's the reason why I tell even people that I work for, that work for me, that I love, that I would hate to leave. If they get a job interview, they should totally take it. Go and take it. I'm not saying take the job offer, but go and do the interview. Find out what else is out there for you. Find out what makes you tick, because you're going to come back and you're going to be that much better. You're going to want to push yourself at this job more. You're going to want to push me to be a better manager for you, because you're going to know what else is out there for you. So always embrace the uncomfortableness, and just be you, and don't be afraid to be you, because there's other people out there trying to be other people. You're the only one that can be you.
Well, Steve, that is phenomenal advice to send us out with. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me here on Let's Blow This Up. This is a great way to kick this series off, man. This was, despite a few tech issues that are obviously resolved as this episode is live, this was good, man. I appreciate you taking the time. What's one place where people can connect with you to get more value from you?
So you can find me, anywhere on all the socials. It's pretty much just at @Radick, SRADICK. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever is out there. I'm usually out there. Or you can just find me around. My office is located right down at the point, down in 4 Gateway. And so you can usually find me out and about around Market Square area. And I'm always down to grab a drink and have conversations like this with anyone who's interested.
I'm thinking CityWorks.
CityWorks is a popular one. Yep.
I know there's a lot of beer for us to choose from there.
Been there once or twice. I head over to Sly Fox's right there, next to our building as well. But yeah, I'll try out most places and grab a drink or two.
So there you have it. For those local to Pittsburgh, make sure you stalk Steve downtown in Market Square. For anybody that's outside of the Pittsburgh region and you want to follow up with Steve, check him out on social media. I'll have links to that in the show notes. Steve, thanks so much for helping me blow this up today.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. And I hope your listeners find some value out of this.
I know they will.